Good evening, everyone. My name is Edward, and I'm part of the programming team here at the Appel Salon. And I'm very pleased to welcome you here tonight with Emma Straub in conversation with Metro News columnist Sue Carter. So I'd now like to get the evening started, and I will welcome Sue Carter.
Hi, thank you very much. So I'm really thrilled tonight, and you'll see why in a second. This is fantastic outfit happening over here. Emma Straub is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Vacationers, and Laura Lamont's Life in Pictures. Her fiction and nonfiction have been published by Tin House, the Paris Review Daily, Time Slate, the New York Times, and Rookie. And her new book, Modern Lovers, which is set in Brooklyn, where she lives with her husband and 2 children, we'll talk a little bit about that later, has just made the New York Times bestseller list. So yeah, congratulations. So tonight's format's pretty straightforward. We'll chat for about 40 minutes and followed by a Q&A, and then Emma will be signing books at the back. So please welcome Emma Straub.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. So before we get started, because I just mentioned this, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what you're wearing right now.
I have to say, so I made myself 2 outfits for my book tour, and it's the best thing that I've ever done. In part because it's always a little bit like tricky to get going on events and things like that. But this way, it's like we got something to talk about right away, even if nobody has read the book or even likes books. You all have to wear clothes. So my publisher made these little sort of makeup bags as a promo item for the book. My copy of the book has no book jacket, but Sue has one. It looks just like this.
Like that.
And so they made these little bags with the illustrations from the book jacket. And when they sent me a link to the website, I realized that I could go on this website, this place called Print All Over Me. And you just upload your graphic, and they just repeat it on your fabric and send you clothing. So I bought myself this extremely comfortable muumuu. I bought myself a jumpsuit, and I bought T-shirts for the rest of my family. Yeah, it's a great idea, and you do not have to have a book out in order to enjoy this. You just have to be slightly ridiculous. That's all you need.
They should be paying you, really.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, okay. That's good. So you just mentioned that you had a onesie made for. So you've been doing some of your touring with a 4-month-old.
Yeah.
And how's that been?
Don't I look well rested? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard having 2 small babies. So I have a almost 5-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. And in my head, I was like, oh, it's going to be so easy because the little one is so portable. But then I remembered that you actually are supposed to put babies on sort of a schedule. They like that because otherwise they turn into little maniacs. Yeah, so the baby is not doing much book touring. He's mostly touring his crib and his little bouncy chairs, things like that, and hanging out in hotel rooms occasionally.
Well, we'll come back a little bit to family and motherhood and how that affects your writing. But first, maybe you want to, I think it's best maybe if you describe to people who haven't had an opportunity to read this fantastic book yet, what it's about basically, and where the idea came from.
Sure. So until recently, I lived on a block in Brooklyn that was sort of very Mr. Rogers-y. I knew all my neighbors. I was in a book club with 23 women on my block. And my next door neighbor was a guy who was in his late 50s when I moved to that house about 8 years ago. And he was the drummer in a local rock and roll band. And my husband and I just loved him. I mean, he's a great great guy, and so apologetic about being a drummer, because like who wants to live next door to a drummer, right? That does not sound ideal. But it always made us really happy when we would hear him practicing, because he wasn't doing it for the fame and glory. That was clear. Like he was just doing it because he loved it, and he was in this band, and they play around the city, and we would go and see them sometimes, and like we just loved him and loved his passion for music. And for a number of years, I wanted to write a short story that was sort of inspired by the two other members of his band who were married to each other. Like there were these. I have to stop talking about them in public, because I feel like whenever I'm in events like this, I'm like, oh, they're not here, but like this could get back to them. But I'm just going to tell you anyway, even though it's kind of a secret. So there was this other couple in the band, and I was kind of obsessed with them because they were married and they played in the band together, and like they had these like promo shots on their website where they would like kind of looked like they were going for like a Blondie kind of thing, but like Blondie like 2015, not like Blondie 1982. I don't know. I was just really into this couple, and I wanted to write a short story about being the teenage son of a couple like that, but it never went anywhere, because I don't know why. Like I couldn't figure out what the story was about, and then I realized that if the story wasn't actually about the band, and if I backed up and the story was more about the marriage and the family and the neighborhood, then there was a lot more for me to play with. Like and there is music in this book, but it's in the background. Like it's not the actual sort of engine, really. That was a long way to talk about the inspiration. But then in terms of the actual book itself, so it's about two families who live on the same block in a neighborhood called Ditmas Park in Brooklyn, which is a neighborhood unlike the rest of New York City, really, because it's like these big Victorian houses with porches and garages and driveways, things like that we all find extremely exotic in New York City. And yeah, I mean, and it's basically just like a story about these two families over the course of one summer, and there's some sex.
There is.
I mean, there's other stuff too, but
There's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
But there is sex.
Yes.
Well, and it is called Modern Lovers, so that might suggest that too, but so much of it is about the family dynamics and those relationships, and how being a mom, has that changed? I mean, you have so much empathy for these teenage characters too, I think. Like, has being mom changed your perspective on writing and what you write?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I just mentioned to Sue back in our little hiding spot in the back there that I could be like totally naked. This was in reference to breastfeeding, I think. That I could be naked sort of in front of anybody, and I wouldn't care, because now I have two babies, and so like I feel like I'm constantly topless everywhere. But I think when I was writing this book, so when I was pregnant with my first son when I was writing The Vacationers, and I felt my sort of sensibilities starting to shift. And I think that book was more sort of honest than any of my previous work. And then by the time I got to Modern Lovers, I already had one child and I was pregnant with my second. And I think I realized that like, this is it. Like this, I am fully in my life now. Not that I wasn't then, and not that people who don't have children are not fully in their lives, but I had this sort of like switch where I realized that like there was no more like waiting. Like I wasn't like in the like practice area anymore. And I didn't want to be afraid of writing about anything. So I really just like went for it. And I think that there is more sex in this book than in my previous books. And I think I think I really started thinking of myself as an adult while writing this book. Like that I wasn't, and like I have very permissive, encouraging, open-minded parents who would always have been delighted for me to write about anything. But I think there was a little part of my brain that until I had children, thought of myself like first as a daughter instead of like as like my own person. And now that I have 2 kids, I'm like, oh, no, like that's me. Like I'm an adult. I really am an adult. And that's also a lot of what happens in the book too, is that it's these 2 generations sort of figuring out where they are in their lives. None of them precisely at the point I'm at, which was purposeful, because I mean I can certainly write about being an 18-year-old girl because I used to be an 18-year-old girl and I remember those feelings very vividly, but they are way far away from me now. And then I can imagine what it's like to be the mother of a kid going away to school, and having been in my marriage for 20 years. I can imagine that, but it's not where I am, which leaves this really nice like hole right at the point where I am now, which I don't think I could write about adequately at the moment. Like it's like, the wounds are all too fresh right now. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned your parents being supportive, and your father is a well-known novelist. So did you grow up thinking, I'm going to be a writer? Or what was that experience being like in a writer's household?
Doesn't everyone? Yeah. I did. I mean, I did always think I was going to be a writer. I wasn't sure that I would be a novelist necessarily. I was a poetry major in college, and I don't know if I really thought I was going to be a poet. But I grew up with a lot of I knew a lot of poets, so maybe I did really think I was going to be a poet, and then it just turned out I wasn't a very good poet, so that was probably not a great career path for me. But I think, people often ask what sort of the benefit was, or a benefit was to having a parent who was a writer. And I think for me, it was really just that, I guess my dad occasionally does give me like writing tips sometimes, but really it's just that I knew that I saw from birth that it was like a real job that someone could have, and that I never had to question whether or not it was possible. Even when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of friends who wanted to be writers and whose sort of immediate whose immediate sort of plan or their hope for their future as a writer was always about teaching. It was always like, okay, well, if I write a book, then I can get a teaching job. Mm-hmm. And many writers, maybe most writers I know, also teach. And I have taught also, but I knew that my ultimate plan was to just be a writer and to just support myself writing books.
Well, and I think of your character Elizabeth, who is a talented musician, but I don't think she ever thought that she could be a musician as a full-time job.
Yeah, I think it does seem sort of crazy to have, just like an artistic life. If you don't have a model for it, if you don't say, oh, yeah, right, people are musicians, lots of them. Mm-hmm. I could do that too, or people are novelists or whatever. It's much easier to make any kind of crazy leap if it doesn't seem crazy.
It sounds like a good tattoo or inspirational card or something like that. There's this whole thing, too, I think everybody at one point is like, oh my God, I'm becoming my mother or my father or whatever. And sometimes that's a great thing. Sometimes it's a little like, oh no, when did that happen? But your teen characters, they go through a lot of parallel sort of situations as the adults, but they seem smarter in some sort of ways, or, you know? Like,
Smarter than the adults.
yeah, in some points, I don't know.
Well, I think I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, I certainly thought I was smarter than any adult.
Oh, absolutely.
It's really sort of hilarious for me now. I mean, this is why I think I like to write about teenagers, is like I was simultaneously like stratospherically confident and still like wept every day because I don't know why. I mean, because, I was in love with my best friend, whatever. All the reasons that teenagers cry every day. But I think it really is such a hormonal, absolutely bonkers time in one's life. Specifically for teenage girls. Teenage boys obviously have a difficult road also, but I think it's much harder to be a teenage girl.
Different, yeah. But you write with such empathy about, I think, all of your characters, actually.
Thanks. I like them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I care about them.
You can tell.
Yeah,
people do.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back into a few years in the story when, so Elizabeth, Andrew, and Zoe, they meet in college and they're in this band with the fourth Lydia. Kitty's Mustache is a fantastic name for a band. How did that come about? Where is that name from?
Well, so the characters, so Elizabeth and Andrew, who are one of the married couples, were in a band with Zoe, who's their neighbor, in Oberlin in the very early 90s, or like 1989, 1991. And so I was trying to think about, this was one of the things that I sort of put in the book just to amuse myself, and then I realized that it was actually turned into a big part of the book. But so Elizabeth was an English major, and so she named the band Kitty's Mustache. I don't know how many of you have read War and Peace, but when I read War and Peace, which was when I was a sophomore at Oberlin, I realized the war scenes, I was like, okay, but the peace scenes are amazing because it's all Kitty and her downy little mustache at a party, at one party after another, and it's just balls and dinners and dancing, and I loved it. So I thought Kitty's Mustache would be a really good, because it also sounds kind of dirty, it just works for a bad college band. And I mean, as you said, teenagers think they're smart, and I think it's especially true of like a 20-year-old in a band in college thinks that they are the smartest person in the world, and the coolest. So it worked. It worked for those purposes.
And you never played in a band yourself?
Oh, no. Nobody wants to hear that. I mean, truly, no one. When I was in the 9th grade, my mother kept trying to sign me up for the chorus at my high school. And I kept going into the office and dropping the class. And we kept eventually they realized that I really just was not going to show up. So they let me get out of it.
But you still have led a life that's been connected to music, though.
Yes, that's true. And I mean, I do know more about bands than most tone-deaf people, I think. Or the inner workings. Not that tone-deaf people you don't have to have musical abilities to appreciate music, obviously. But I did for about 10 years work for a band called the Magnetic Fields. If any of you are fans of the Magnetic Fields and came to see them in Toronto in the last decade, then I sold you a t-shirt. But yeah, because I was the personal assistant to Stephen Merritt, who's the songwriter for the Magnetic Fields, and I went on tour with them half a dozen times. And so I do know a lot about band life. What was really funny is that when this book came out, one of my friends from the band, I gave her a copy, and she was seemed a little jittery, and she was like,
oh, no.
and she was like, it's not, and I was like, Oh my God, this book could not be less about the magnetic fields. Like, don't worry. But it turned out that the band they'd been sort of emailing about it, because like there's like a little, like, you know, a little blurb that goes up on Amazon or whatever that like tells you, and they were like, I really scared them because I know all their secrets. I know all their secrets, and not a single one of those secrets is in this book. But yeah, it was entertaining to frighten my friends, though, for a little bit.
Stephen has his own sort of, like, I think, cult following. Like, I think there's people who really love him too.
Yeah.
So did that teach you anything about sort of fandom and celebrity in any kind of way that could have fed into this book?
Maybe. I mean, I think it did. Maybe. Because there are so my job, when I worked for Stephen, I would often sort of do correspondence for him and sometimes answer fan mail kind of stuff, and I still do my husband and I both actually do their Twitter and Facebook accounts. Really just like, I don't even think they pay us. I just do it. I just do it. They don't know how to do it, so I just do it. It's entertaining to sometimes pretend to be someone else. But yeah, I mean, there are, especially around their album 69 Love Songs, like, people get crazy, and there would often be marriage proposals and things like that happened at the concerts. Sometimes people would have me like run back to like ask them to sing something specific so that a proposal could happen, which was never a good idea if it wasn't already on the set list, because they just didn't do things on the fly like that. And then you have to like go and like crush someone's dream and be like, I'm sorry, I know you want to get married, but they're not going to play that song. But then there were songs that they always sang that, and you just knew. Sometimes you just knew, like you would see someone get up. I think actually there was one in Montreal where they played at it was this weird club. Maybe you guys have been to it. I don't know. It was like kind of like a sticky floor place.
There's a few of those.
But it was really pitched. Like, the floor was sort of like that. Like, it was like, it would have been a really good like roller derby rink. But people got up, just a couple got up at the very beginning of this one song of theirs called The Book of Love, and just started sort of slow dancing, and everyone else was sitting down, and it was really beautiful. I don't know. That was not an answer to any question.
No, that was entertaining.
The other thing that I learned though from them is how to really proficiently size someone up for a t-shirt. Like, I could tell you what size t-shirt anybody is.
Oh, maybe they'll be part of the book signing.
Yeah.
Later. So maybe you could talk a little bit about Lydia, which is, I guess, where I was going with that, in terms of, she's someone who's no longer part of this group for various reasons, but the formation of her and where she comes from.
Yeah, sure. So Lydia was the fourth member of their band, and the rest of the band, moves on to other pursuits, sort of without much muss and fuss. Lydia leaves the band, drops out of school, and immediately moves to New York City, bleaches her hair, and becomes sort of like a Courtney Love type figure, only even more popular and minus the rest of the band. Like, she becomes this sort of iconic figure, and she releases a record with one of the Kitty's Mustache songs, a song called Mistress of Myself, which was really fun to write. And it becomes like this sort of feminist rallying cry, like angry girl punk song, that becomes this like much larger than life, and she becomes this larger than life figure. And when the book opens, that is sort of coming back around, and it forces the rest of the band and characters to sort of deal with the wake that she has left. Yeah, what I liked about Lydia was that I could really leave her as sort of like a specter in the background. Because, I wrote my first novel, Laura Lamont's Life in Pictures, was very much about fame and was about this one woman's like hunger to be known and seen. And so, maybe I hadn't thought about this before, but I think maybe because I already did that, I didn't feel the need to sort of deal with Lydia. Like, I was happy to have Lydia like go have her famous life elsewhere. And I was just interested in the rest of the band that wasn't a band anymore. Elizabeth and Andrew do play music sometimes in their garage, but it's not in any sort of professional way. And I liked that. Like, I liked that they had this past that had a bit of sort of reflected sheen, but that it wasn't their life. That it wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't what their lives were about in the present.
They are, I guess, technically Generation X or whatever you want to call them. And I'm probably dating myself, but it did make me sort of think of like movies like Reality Bites. Where, you have Ethan Hawke's character, basically saying like, if you don't have this creative, fulfilled life, then you're basically nothing. Like, you might as well be dead.
Yeah.
And, I'm kind of wondering if that is a curse of that generation that,
I don't know. I mean, I love Reality Bites, and I also love Ethan Hawke. Don't we all? But I do. I don't know. I think that my characters actually don't feel that way. And I don't know. I'm trying to think of other friends of mine who are of the same age as my characters, and I don't know if they feel that way either. Like, the only character who I think really does feel that way in the book is Andrew, who, should Ethan Hawke want to make a film,
be good.
He's hired. He'd be perfect, actually. Yeah. He'd be perfect. But he's the only one who really is sort of still casting about for his life's work, and he's able to do that because he has family money, and so he can go to film school and be a cinematographer for 2 years, and then go try to become a woodworker or whatever. I mean, he's had lots of jobs, and he's sort of a dilettante, and that's something that I think for a lot of people, myself sometimes included, could make him like kind of an awful character, that he's sort of rudderless and sanctimonious. But one of the things that I really tried to do with Andrew was to give him enough of a redeeming like inner life that you don't just write him off, and you understand that why Elizabeth is still with him, and that and really it's that he's a really good dad, that he's not necessarily a great guy, and he certainly hasn't found his calling professionally, but he's a really good father, and I wanted to make sure that was on the page, that it wasn't just like, oh, he's like a spoiled kid who becomes a spoiled adult who has no redeeming qualities. I wanted to make him better than that.
And there's a lot of humor in the book too, and they all have their moments and their lines, and was that fun to stretch because you're funny.
The humor muscles?
So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I've decided, at least for now, that if I'm not amusing myself, what is the point? Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully the book is funny. I certainly made myself laugh writing it. And also a bonus to writing a book while extremely pregnant is that you also forget everything. So even now on my book tour, I'll be like sort of leafing through to find a passage to read or whatever, and I'll be like, that's good. I forgot that's in there. Which is crazy because, you know, when you write a book, you have to read it like about 1,000 times while writing it, while editing it, and then, you know, the page proofs and the copy edits. I had the most protracted, this is maybe not another thing I'm not supposed to talk about, but like feud with a copy editor on this book where she went through and took out, with some hyperbole, every single comma in my book. And I had to go through, and at first I was like, okay, because you know how it works. It's like track changes basically. So it's really easy to just say like, okay, I accept this. And then I realized that I was like, you know, bleeding to death from 1,000 paper cuts. And I went back and I was like, no, wait, no. Those are my commas. And I went back and I talked to my editor about it. She was like, no, those are your commas. So I kept the commas.
It must have been a horrifying thing to see all of those track changes, because there's probably a lot of commas that have been taken
so
out.
many. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, you asked about humor, not commas. Yeah, I mean, I personally, I worked as a bookseller for a number of years, and I would say there would be like three things that people would come in and say. They would either say, you know, I heard about this book on NPR or read about this book in the New York Times or whatever. I think it's about whales or whatever, and you have to figure out what they were talking about. Or they come in and say, I need a present for someone. You know, my father-in-law is 63 and loves the Civil War or whatever, and you have to think, okay, and find that. Or they say, I'm going away, I'm like going on vacation, I need something fun. People love reading for pleasure, which fills me with joy. I mean, as both a reader and a bookseller, that was always my favorite when it wasn't, you know, for someone else, and it was just, they didn't have anything in mind, they just wanted something for pleasure. And obviously people are not all made, you know, delighted by the same kinds of books, but when I am reading for pleasure, I like to read books that are funny and that are just on the human level. Like, I like books about marriages and friendships and everyday occurrences. I mean, not that I don't also sometimes like a murder mystery or something like that, because I do. But most of the time, I want something that feels really real to me. And so that's always what I want to write. And I think that most of the writers I know, actually, I think do that also. Sort of, you write for yourself first as your own like ideal reader, and then hope that there are other people like you in the world.
And then, because of some of the subjects that you write about, because you do write about relationships and marriages and stuff, like I see your books often on beach read lists, and I'm wondering how you feel about that, or do you care? Do you think it's a great thing? Or?
First of all, I think that, you know, anyone who writes for like newspapers or magazines or things like those lists, they happen all year round. So it's like, either if you're published in the summer, it means your book is probably might be summery, but really it just means that like that's when it's coming out, and so that's what your publicist is going to pitch you for, like, you know, they're not going to put my book on the like Christmas, holiday reading list because it came out in June, But also, like, I think that beach reads, to me at least, is like the epitome of reading for pleasure.
I think it's high praise.
Yeah. So like, if someone wants to bring my book somewhere just because they think they'll enjoy it, I'm okay with that.
This one went to Paris, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah,
la-di-da.
So it's well traveled. So I'm just checking in the time. We probably have time for a couple more questions, and then we'll turn it over. And just talking about that too, you told me that you thought a lot about Jane Austen when writing this book, and what about her is so attractive to you, her writing?
I think actually in the airport on the way here, I saw a young woman reading what looked like a very battered old copy of Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, and it made me so happy. Yeah. Not just because my name is Emma. I can't control that. But she'd write that many books, it's a good one. But it just made me so happy because I knew exactly the experience she was having reading it. Mm-hmm. And even though I had the new Anne Patchett in my bag, which is also good, I was jealous. I was like, oh man, that's what I want to read right now. I find Jane Austen so utterly satisfying because there are always lots of characters, there's always lots of humor, and there's love. And I don't know, I'm very old-fashioned. I just that's what I like. And in this book, I cared, I really cared about making sure that my characters were in a good spot at the ending. Not to say that there are not 3 simultaneous weddings at the end of this book. There are not. There are no weddings at the end of this book. But I did really care about making sure that they were all in a good place, where I felt satisfied for them. And that to me is a Austen sort of goal for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
It looks like they have a microphone set up here if people want to step up if they have any questions.
You can really ask me anything.
Anything.
In case that's not clear. Hi, you don't have to run, and we'll wait.
We're good.
Hi, I loved your book, and I passed it on to a friend, and she read it in one night. She texted me at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, oh my God, are you okay? And she's like, no, I hate you. This book is so good. So well done.
Thank you.
This might be too personal, but
Impossible.
If you could, if you see yourself in any of the characters from the book, which one do you think it is?
If I see myself in them? So I too went to Oberlin. So in some ways, I put some of my feelings about Oberlin into Elizabeth, but they all had way more fun at Oberlin than I did. I actually hated Oberlin. The teenagers are both sort of different sides of my brain. Harry, I was always a really good kid, and I always told my parents where I was going, and they always trusted me and all that.
Are you an only child?
I have an older brother. He was the problem.
Oh.
I was the good one.
Always the older one.
I mean, that was how it was presented in our family, even though we were both equally problematic in reality. But then, and Ruby, the teenage girl, is, I mean, in my dreams, I was Ruby is all confidence, and she's just a powerful girl. I don't think I was quite there, but I had those friends, and that was what I wanted.
I loved her though, because even though she was so confident, she still kind of had that Achilles' heel with her ex-boyfriend,
Oh, yeah.
Dust.
Yeah, Dust. I love Dust. That's a
Who
good
we
name.
find out at the end was quite successful.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
no
a
spoiler. No
It's
spoiler.
not
No,
a spoiler,
it's okay.
I promise. He
I
was
like
successful
those
in
noises
ambulance.
about, they were upset.
And then the other question I had is there going to be a sequel, or do you think your next book is going to be completely different?
Well, so I've already, so when I sold this book, let me back up. So after The Vacationers, I knew I wanted to sell 2 books because I just wanted like job security. So I had this this other book about a family of cheesemakers that I was like really planning. I was like,
That sounds awesome.
it's my cheese book. There's a really good title. I think it's great. I'm not going to tell you because my husband tells me it's terrible. It's a cheese pun. We'll see. But I was like planning out my cheese book, and then I was like, okay, but I have to figure out the other book. And then I was like, maybe this could be a book. And then all of a sudden it was like I'd written it. So I do have another book.
The cheese one.
The cheese one.
Okay.
And then also this last year, I started writing a YA novel, just because I have noticed that I keep writing about teenagers, and I think it might be time for me to just like go for it and just do it. But then I went and had a baby, and so I haven't paid attention to the teenagers for a few months. But yeah, so coming up next is one of those 2, if not both of those 2. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you feel having read it, but for me, the ending of the book, which I will not describe, but the last section was really sort of my way of like figuring out where everyone was, like a little ways down the road, and so that I didn't have to worry about them. I mean, that's not to say that I couldn't someday. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, pick them back up.
Who
They're
knows?
great characters,
Yeah,
though.
thank
and
you.
I hope you do write something along their world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Is there anyone else who has questions? Here we go.
Oh, I like it too.
Ooh, I like it.
Now we're all running. Sorry, I don't usually ask questions, so I had to write them down.
I like it.
So, one question. How did you go from poetry to novel writing?
Very abruptly. So I was a poetry major in college, and I was having. I mean, this is why I didn't like Oberlin, really. I should stop saying that, but it's true. And the reason that I was unhappy there was because I was writing poems, and the English department or the creative writing department really was not. We were just like a bad fit. Like none of the professors liked me, and I didn't like them, and it was just, and like I am like a pretty social, like I get along with most people, but it just wasn't, personally I got along with them, but it just wasn't, I don't know. So I was getting just like a lot of criticism constantly about my poems. And I graduated, and I had 10 days off before starting a job in publishing as an editorial assistant. And in those 10 days, I thought, okay, I need to do something. I know I want to be a writer. I'm going to try to write a novel. And so before I started work, I plotted out everything. I made myself an outline and a schedule. And so I started work in June, and in 3 months, I'd written a novel. It was not a good novel, but it was a novel. And it was sturdy enough that I felt confident that was the right medium for me. I mean, it took me several more tries. Like I mean, that was my first novel, and then I wrote, actually, so the second novel I wrote in my 20s that did not get published, there were 4 of them total. But the second one was about a poet, and when my agent sent it around, the woman who is now my editor rejected it. And she said, I wish I liked the rest of this book as much as I liked the poems.
Oh.
Ouch. It's okay, but it was a compliment, you know. But yeah, I mean, so it was very quick, and I didn't stop writing poems. Rarely I will still write poems. Right now, I really like to make my 2.5-year-old write poems with me, because he's an excellent poet. But yeah, I think once I sort of took a stab at writing novels, I knew that it was better for me. It was where I could really sort of have more fun with my voice. So yeah, it was a pretty quick transition, I guess, is the answer.
And is it still so easy to write? Like, what's your writing schedule with 2 kids?
Well, now it's utterly impossible. But starting in July, I will have a little bit of childcare. So I will have like 20 hours a week where I can try to get back to work. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I suppose this is something that most people know. But yeah, it turns out that babies take up a whole lot of time. But I figured it out. I mean, I figured it out with this one, and I think that what I learned pretty quickly was that there's just no wasting time anymore. You know, that if I have hours that are mine, then I'm going to use it to work. That I can't, you know, I just can't waste time, especially because I have deadlines from the publisher. You know, I mean, I gotta get it done. You know, there's no like waiting for the muse, you know. You can't just like swan around the house in a robe, you know, and a cigarette holder, like waiting for inspiration, you know. It's like, no, it's like, oh my God, okay, the babysitter's here, I have to go work right now.
Hi. I loved your book, by the way.
Thank you.
I saw your jumpsuit on Twitter.
I brought the jumpsuit to Toronto also, and I asked which one would be better for the crowd, and Emma said the dress, so I wore the dress, but yeah.
I'm glad I got to see both. This is sort of goes off of the last question, but you mentioned you're reading Anne Patchett's new novel, which I'm really jealous of because it's not out yet.
Yeah.
And I love when she talks about in The Getaway Car about her writing process and how she carries these characters in her head all the time.
Yeah.
How do you mentioned with your first book you had an outline and a schedule, and like what's your process like? Are you the person who carries it around? Are you writing bits everywhere?
No, I mean, I wish I could just, whatever Anne Patchett does, that's what I want to do. Like, clearly that's the ideal, you know.
I don't know anyone who can do that, though.
No, I know. She's magic. And she owns a bookstore, which means she's just like an earthbound goddess. But we already knew that, I guess, too. For me, I do actually really like to outline, even if it's an outline that I don't follow, just because I think it's really helpful when you don't have time to sit around and wait for the muse with your cigarette holder to feel like you have a roadmap, and even if it's a pretend roadmap, just to like keep you moving forward. But with this book, I don't know why, but I just I was much looser with myself about it. I still gave myself weekly page counts. Like I had to write, because I had a very hard deadline from the publisher, and so I knew I had to get it done. But what was really fun for me, and what I hope to do with subsequent books also, is that I had this outline, and then I thought that the book was just about Elizabeth and Andrew. Like I thought it was just about their marriage, really, with like some like fun stuff with their son. But then Zoe kept coming back, and all of a sudden I was like writing chapters from her wife's point of view, and I was like, wait, what's going on here? that was really, really fun for me. That was the most fun part of the book, was that I realized that the book was sort of pulling me in a different direction than I anticipated, and that I thought, well, okay, if that's where we're going, like if that's where I'm wanting to spend time, then that's where we should be spending the time. So the book now really is sort of half and half. Like, I mean, I don't know in terms of page count, whatever, but in terms of the book's heart, like it's really in both of these families, and that was really fun for me to let myself off the leash, and to have fun sort of exploring 2 marriages instead of just one.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Sure.
And so jealous that you have Ann Patchett's new book.
I honestly, it's just, I have a friend, one of my closest friends owns a bookstore. And I mean, I used to get galleys all the time when I worked at a bookstore, but a friend of mine owns a different bookstore, and I was at her house the other day, and she's like a book person, so there are just like mountains of books everywhere all over her house, and I saw it and I picked it up, and I was like, you wouldn't let me do this, would you? And she was like, I can get another copy. And I didn't even, she like hadn't even finished saying that before it was in my bag.
Well, that's great, and your book reminds me a lot of hers too, so thanks.
I thank you very much.
So I think
Okay. You were fast. She's a girl on the go.
Courage to do this. So the first thing I read by you was Other People We Married, which I know you talked about Laura Lamont being your first novel, but that was published first, I think, and that's sort of what that's when I fell in love with your writing, and I wanted to know, when did you write those short stories? How did that come about? How did you end up publishing that book first?
Yeah. Sure.
It's really great. I don't know if people don't talk about it enough.
Thank you. So it's so funny how it happened, actually. It's like a really sort of crazy story that brings us back to the beginning, actually. So it's a good last question. Nice. So I went to an MFA program, as many people do, and I wrote a lot of short stories there, but because I had spent my 20s sending out novels that got rejected everywhere, I never in a million years thought about trying to publish a collection of short stories, because that seems like 20 times harder, because so few people buy short story collections. So I was on tour with the Magnetic Fields at the merch booth, it's my spot, in Bloomington, Indiana. Not a big place. And this guy who I knew a little bit, because he had a website called 5 Chapters, where he would publish one short story a week, sort of serially Monday through Friday. He came up to me at the merch booth and he said, I'm thinking about moving into print. Do you have a book? This is at the merch booth, right? This is like the least, it was professional. I was professionally selling merchandise, but I was not like in my writer mode. And I was like, absolutely, yes, I have a manuscript. So then I had to go home and put together a manuscript really quickly. So it was about half stories that I'd written during my MFA program, about half stories that I'd written afterward. And he published it. He published, I think, 2,000 copies. And at the time, I was working at this bookstore, and I sold 800 of them, 800 of those 2,000 myself. I guess they weren't all, I didn't hand sell every single one of those 800 copies, but pretty much. Let's say I probably sold 650 of them. And I loved it. I love that book because it just it seems impossible to me still that it exists. Just because it was I don't know, it was like it dropped out of the sky, sort of, because I had tried so hard for so long to publish a book. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along and is just like, hey, you want to publish a book? And I was like, yes, I do. And then what happened was Riverhead bought Laura Lamont, and then I don't even think Laura Lamont was out yet. I don't think it was out yet before they bought the rights to the collection and then republished it, which is nice because, before River had bought it and re-released it, you could only get it from me at the bookstore or from this guy's website. It wasn't on Amazon. It wasn't, you couldn't get it anywhere else. And now actually they just repackaged it so that it sort of looks, how they do that sometimes.
It's very pretty. Well,
Yeah,
where they
they try to make all your books look the same. It's kind of a weird thing to do. It's like people can read, but whatever. But yeah, that's how it happened. Thank you.
There'd be a lot of aspiring writers looking for jobs at merch tables.
Hey, it's not bad. It's not a bad gig because you have to be a good salesperson. And really, I think that every writer should get a job in a bookstore because not only because you can sell your own book, but because then, which is a good perk, a very good perk, especially around the holidays when my very nice boss would put up a little stand of my book just nice. Right next to me on the counter. It's amazing how much guilt can do to sell books. People are like, oh, you wrote that? Okay, I'll get that
too. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for a delightful evening.
Thank you.
And so I guess you're going to be signing books at the...
Yeah, I think I'll be right over yonder.
Great. And thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight.
Yeah.
Have a good, wonderful evening.
Thank you.